Asleep with Gina Marie. You have again found yourself on your way to a classic short story. Nope, we are not going to waste your time with repetitive sounds or chanting or any ASMR. Sorry. We know why you're here. You're here to be drawn into a compelling story from an honored author. Hi, I'm Gina, and it's a very special day around here because we're about to record on Engineer Bob's birthday. Kind of mean, huh, making him work on his birthday? But don't worry, you can count on it. He's going to be enjoying stuffed bell peppers and chocolate cake as soon as we get this thing into the can. Okay. Oh, yes, he did say that subscriptions make very nice birthday gifts. Hint, hint. I want to know what you thought about last week's mesmerizing story from, I love her, Daphne du Maurier. I'd never read this story before. I was so thrilled when I found it, and then when I finished it, oh my gosh, I was completely shocked by its ending. How did you feel about it? Let me know, please. So this week, we are tapping into another early work from one of our favorite authors. And it's controversial, too, especially when you think about that it was written in the 1940s. And who is this author? Like you didn't read that when you clicked on it. But let's find out anyway. Here we go. Well, today's author was born in New Orleans, spent his childhood in both the Deep South and New York City. Before his stepfather adopted him, his name was Truman Streckfus Person. That's right, we all know him now as Truman Capote, the novelist, playwright, screenwriter, actor, and fortunately, short story writer. He wrote his very first work of fiction at the age of 11. He spoke of his early writing as just his way of coping with the crazy upbringing that he had. It was filled with parental divorce and abandonment. He believed there was only one relative in his life who loved him, and that was Nanny Rumbly Falk. He wrote about her lovingly in his beautiful autobiographical story, A Christmas Memory. It's on Fast Asleep, episode 177. Now, if you've had the pleasure of watching Truman Capote in old interviews, I'm sure you'll never forget this strange little man with a very funny little voice. He was strange, but he was also very charming. He was a master of words, and not just in his written work. Okay, yes, author of The Light-Hearted Breakfast at Tiffany's, but don't forget, he also wrote the chilling true crime novel In Cold Blood. Yes, but only after charming his way into the real-life characters that he very deeply investigated. Well, it was a bestseller, In Cold Blood, and it gave Capote the success and wealth he had always craved. It made him the toast of the jet set. This wealth and fame was wonderful, but unfortunately, it was what led to his slow but steady decline because of alcoholism and drug addiction. He died in 1984 in Los Angeles of liver disease. He was 59 years old. You know, I think you're going to be very satisfied with today's story. It is always refreshing when justice is well served. Published in the 1940s. Tuck in, everybody, for Truman Capote's Louise. Part 1. opened the door stealthily and looked up and down the dark corridor. It was deserted, and she sighed with relief as she closed the door. Well, that was one thing done, and the only thing she had found out was that either Louise didn't keep her mail, or she burned it. The rest of them must be down at dinner, she thought. I'll say I had a sick headache. She crept down the stairs and went quickly across the great lounge, across the terrace, and into the dining room. The room was filled with the sound of girls laughing and talking. Unobserved, she took her place next to Madame, at the fourth table in the quietly pretentious dining salon of Miss Burke's Academy for Young Ladies. In answer to Madame's questioning eyes, she lied. I've been suffering from a severe headache. I lay down to rest, and I suppose I must have fallen asleep. I did not hear the dinner chimes. Oh, she spoke with the smooth perfection of wording and accent that Miss Burke so desired all her students to acquire. Ethel was, in Miss Burke's opinion, the epitome of all that she could ever hope to attain among her students. A young lady of 17 with background, wealth, and certainly a most brilliant mind. The majority of the Academy girls thought Ethel rather on the stupid side. That is, about life. Ethel, in turn, blamed her unpopularity upon Louise Simone, a French girl of exquisite beauty. Louise was generally acknowledged to be the queen bee of the Academy. Oh, the girls worshipped her, and the teachers jealously admired her, both for her mind and her almost uncanny beauty. She was a tall girl, magnificently proportioned, with dark olive skin. Jet black hair framed her face and flowed rich and wavy to her shoulders. Under certain lights, it cast off a bluish halo. Her eyes, as Madame of Table 4 had once exclaimed in a rapture of admiration, were as black as the night. She was dearly loved by everyone except Ethel, and possibly Miss Burke herself, who somehow vaguely resented the girl's influence over the entire school. She did not feel that it was good for the school or for the girl herself. The girl had had excellent letters from the Petite École in France and the Mentone Academy in Switzerland. Miss Burke had met neither of the girl's parents, who resided at their chalet in Geneva. All arrangements had been made through a Mr. Nicole, Louise's American guardian, from whom Miss Burke received her check annually. Louise had come at the opening of the fall semester and had, within 5 months, put the Academy into the palm of her hand. Ethel despised the Simone girl, who, it was rumored, was the daughter of a French count and a Corsican heiress. She loathed everything about her looks, her popularity, the smallest detail of her person and mannerisms, and Ethel did not know exactly why. It was not altogether because she was jealous, though that was a great deal of it. It was not because she thought Louise laughed at her secretly, or because she acted as if Ethel never existed. It was something else. Ethel suspected something about Louise that no one else would ever have dreamed of, and she meant to find out if she was right. Louise might not be so wonderful then. Maybe she hadn't found anything in her room this afternoon, not even a letter, nothing, but Ethel smiled across the dining room to the table where Louise sat, gaily laughing and talking, the center of attention. Ethel had a little interview planned with Miss Burke for that night. Part 2. The grandfather clock was chiming 8 in the reception salon of Miss Burke's quarters, where Ethel stood nervously waiting. The lights were dim, and the corners of the room were in darkness. The whole atmosphere was cold and Victorian. Ethel waited at the window, watching the first snowfall of the year, the white mantling of the naked trees and the dusty silver cloaking of the earth. I must write a poem about this sometime. The First Snowfall by Ethel Pendleton. She smiled wanly and sat down on a dark, tapestried chair. The door opened at the other end of the room, and Mildred Barnett emerged from Miss Burke's private sitting room. "Good night, Miss Burke, and thank you ever so much for your help." Ethel moved away from the shadows and crossed the salon quickly. She paused at the door of Miss Burke's sitting room and took a deep breath. She knew just what she was going to say. After all, Miss Burke should know what she suspected. It was all for the good of the school. Nothing else. But Ethel knew. She was lying even to herself. She knocked softly and waited until she heard Miss Burke's high voice. "Come in, please." Miss Burke was seated in front of her fireplace, drinking a small china demi-tasse of coffee. There was no other light in the room, and Ethel thought, as she sat down on the soft cushion at Miss Burke's feet, that it was strangely like a scene of peace and contentment on a holiday card. "How nice of you to drop in on me, Ethel, my dear. Is there something that I may do for you?" Ethel almost wanted to laugh. It was so funny, so ironic. In 15 minutes, this elderly, composed woman would be quite shaken. "Miss Burke, something has come to my notice which I believe warrants your immediate attention." She had chosen her language carefully and accented the words precisely in the manner that Miss Burke so heartily felt was correct and genteel. "It is in connection with Louise Simone. You see, a friend of my family's, a physician, called on me recently here at school, and..." Miss Burke put down her demi-tasse and listened to Ethel's story in shocked amazement. Her stately face flushed. Once, during the recitation, she exclaimed, "But Ethel, well, this cannot be true. I made all the arrangements through a person of obvious integrity, a Mr. Nicole. Well, surely he would know. We could never allow such a thing, such a dreadful thing." "I know it to be true," Ethel exclaimed, petulant at this disbelief. "I swear it. Call this Mr. Nicole tomorrow. Ask him. Tell him the situation is intolerable and jeopardizing the standing of your school, if I am right. I know that I am. No, do not rely on Mr. Nicole alone. Surely there are authorities." And Miss Burke nodded. She was becoming more convinced and more shocked every minute. There was only the sound of Ethel's voice and the soft purr of the fire and the gentle presence of falling snow whispering at the window pane. Stay with me. I'll be right back. Part 3. There was one pale light burning in the corridor when Ethel reached her room. The signal for lights out had been given a good hour before. She would have to undress in the dark. The instant she entered her room, she knew something was wrong. She knew she was not alone. In a frightened whisper, she said, "Who's here?" In sudden terror, she thought, "Oh, it's Louise. Somehow she's found out. She knows. And she's come here." Then, above the beating of her own heart, she heard the soft rustle of silk, and a hand clutched her arm tightly. "It is I, Mildred." "Mildred Barnett?" "Yes. I came here to stop what you're doing." Ethel attempted to laugh, but it stopped somewhere, and she coughed instead. I haven't the slightest, not even the foggiest notion what you're talking about. Stop what? But she felt the falseness in her voice, and she was frightened. Mildred shook her. You know what I mean. You saw Miss Burke tonight. I listened. Perhaps it's not the most honorable thing, but I'm glad I did. If I can help Louise out of that lie you told tonight. Ethel tried to push her accuser's arm away. Stop it! You're hurting me. You did lie, didn't you? Mildred's voice was hoarse with fury. No. It was the truth, I swear it. Miss Burke's going to find out if it isn't the truth, and then you'll see. You won't think little Miss Simone is so wonderful then. Mildred released her grip on Ethel. Listen, it wouldn't make one particle of difference to me whether it was true or not. You aren't even in a class with that girl. She paused for a moment and chose her words carefully. You take my advice. You go to Miss Burke. You tell her you were lying, or... I'm not responsible for your health, Ethel Pendleton. You're playing with dynamite. With that as a farewell, she opened the door and slammed it with a bang. Ethel stood shivering in the terrible darkness. It wasn't because of Louise. She didn't care about that. It was the others. Mildred would tell them probably, and that was why. She suddenly knew. She was going to cry. Part 4. Miss Burke lay on the sofa of her sitting room, her head propped up by a huge pink silk pillow. Her hands were pushed tightly against her eyes, trying to drive away the dull ache which gnawed at her fraught nerves. Miss Burke thought with a shudder of what would have happened if Ethel had told the other students instead of her, and they in turn had told their parents. Oh yes, Ethel should be congratulated. When Ethel entered the headmistress's private kingdom, the clock in the reception salon was chiming 5. The feeble winter sun had disappeared, and the gray January dusk filtered weakly through the heavily draped windows. She could see that Miss Burke was in an emotionally disturbed state. Oh, good afternoon, dear. Miss Burke's voice was tired and strained. You wished to see me? Ethel sought to keep herself in appearance as innocent as possible. Miss Burke gestured with annoyance. Oh, let us come to the point at once. You were correct. I called Mr. Nicole and demanded a full report of the girl's parents. Her mother was an American woman of color from the West. She was a sensational dancer in Paris and married a wealthy, titled Frenchman, Alexis Simone. So, Louise is, as you suspected, a person of color. Most unfortunate. But naturally the situation is intolerable, as I explained to Mr. Nicole. I told him she would receive immediate dismissal. he is calling for her tonight. Naturally, I had an interview with Louise and explained the situation to her as kindly as possible. Oh, but why go into that? She looked at Ethel as if she were seeking sympathy, but all she saw was a young girl's face whose thin lips were stretched in a sardonic smile of triumph. Miss Burke knew with sudden realization how she had played into this jealous girl's hands. Abruptly, she said, "Will you please leave me?" When Ethel had gone, Miss Burke lay there on the sofa, remembering with horrible clarity all the things Louise had said in her defense. What difference did it make? She did not look to be of color. She was as clever and as charming as any of the other girls, better educated than most. She was so happy here. Was not America a democracy? Miss Burke tried to soothe herself with the thought that what she had done had to be done. After all, hers was a fashionable institution, and she had been tricked into accepting the girl, but something else kept telling her that she was wrong and that Louise was right. Part 5. It was 9 o'clock, and Ethel lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, trying not to think of anything or hear anything. She wanted to fall asleep and forget. Suddenly, there was a soft knock on the door. Then the door opened, and Louise Simone was standing there. Ethel shut her eyes tightly. She hadn't counted on this. "What do you want?" She talked up to the ceiling and did not turn her head. The beautiful girl stood by the bed and looked down directly into Ethel's face. Ethel could feel those dark eyes on her, and she knew they were swollen from tears. "I came to ask you why you did this to me. Do you dislike me so?" "I hate you." "Why?" Louise was earnest in asking. "I don't know. Please, go. Leave me alone." She could hear Louise opening the door. "Ethel, you are a strange girl. I am afraid I do not understand." And the door was closed. A few minutes later, Ethel heard a car in the driveway. She went to the window and looked out. A black limousine was turning through the stone gates out of the school grounds. When she turned around, Ethel was looking into the face of Mildred Barnett. Mildred said simply, "Well, Ethel, you've won and you've lost, all at the same time. I told you, you were playing with dynamite." "Yes, Ethel." "Of a certain type. Oh, you've given a rather brilliant performance. Shall I applaud?" Introduction information for this episode is from an article entitled "How Truman Capote Was Destroyed by His Own Masterpiece" by Ebbs Burrow for Literary Hub, and other sources in our show notes. Music for this episode is Adieu from Ludovico Einaudi and Somewhere in Between from Jacob La Vallée. You can always reach us right here in comments, or you can email us at fastasleepwithginamarie44@gmail.com, or on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. It is your reviews, likes, comments, and subscriptions that keep us here for you. We thank you for listening. Keyword: dynamite. Next week, a compelling story from Roald Dahl. So, until then, good night.